California City, and Gordon landed about 20 miles short up in the field, and I went out with a bunch of guys, and we picked him up and put him in his trailer. And he's been doing great stuff ever since. And I have to agree with a number of things that Gordon mentioned. Most of them I forgot, but the one I remember is that what we do is really a great team effort. It's just fun because it's a team. And his team is constituted somewhat differently from the team that we use, but he had more, drivers and co-pilots and stuff. But we had a big team. Yeah, the other thing is that we were able to take a lot of the load off the pilot. Gordon does a lot of his planning and preparation himself. And in our thing, we had a couple of mechanics and operations guys that took care of clearances, and there were people around that did everything. We had a pressure suit technician, and so we just put our bodies in the pressure suit room and stand there, and pretty soon you get dressed, and somebody dresses you. I don't know if you guys, anybody remembers Cat Ballou, the movie. But there was a couple of sensational scenes in there with Lee Marvin. But the one that is apropos here is one where he was getting his bath in his long underwear and all his paraphernalia on for the big gunfight. And every time I get suited up in a pressure suit, I remember Lee Marvin and Cat Ballou. It's a great scene. So what we do, it's kind of the similar. What Gordon does also is that you've got to be in the right place in the world for it to work, and it doesn't happen very often, even if when you're in the right place. And the place we have to be is somewhere not too far from one of the poles. You've got to be somewhere in the vicinity of 60 degrees, between about 60 and 80 degrees north in the northern hemisphere winter, or you have to be somewhere between about 50 and 80 degrees south in the southern hemisphere winter. So, as you can imagine, it's cold and dark under those conditions, and particularly in the northern hemisphere because it's in the Arctic night, the land of the midnight sun or lack thereof. And in the southern hemisphere, you can clear out to 50 degrees south, so there's quite a bit of daylight even in the dead of winter when our conditions prevail. Now, I got sidetracked in my soaring onto this altitude idea, trying to see how high we could get. It just seemed kind of amazing that a sailplane potentially can go higher than a power plane. And so we set out to do that. And this is how we go about it. See if you can make that thing run. Oops, wrong one. Go back and try another button and see if it'll run.
Okay.
No, we didn't do it.
We should get the Google guy over here.
Well, let's not worry about it, but basically there's a band of wind that goes around the North Pole
Oh,
here
here.
in winter.
Is this
Well, okay, just leave it at
this
this.
video here?
Yeah, it's a video.
It's playing.
You have to put it on the other screen.
Yeah.
Here, you try.
Well, I'm not on mine.
No, it's right. It's right.
Can you put your cursor
There you
in?
go. No, no.
Put the cursor on,
Go
Go
back.
back.
cursor on the map.
Wind. that goes around the winter end of the Earth, around the pole. And the core of that rope is at about 100,000 feet typically. So it's about twice as high as the jet stream, and it's about twice as fast as the jet stream. 200 to 300 knots is not unusual in this wind. Next slide now. And this is what it does you. This is, here's the South Pole, and here's the equator, and this is the surface, and that's 100,000 feet. And that's that thing called, well, it's got a couple of definitions, or a couple of names. We'll call it the polar vortex to be not confusing. The polar vortex is basically all the wind that goes around in a circle in the vicinity of the pole. But we'll call this thing the polar vortex. In some literature it's called the stratospheric polar night jet. And this one is purple here. It's about 150 knots at 100,000 feet. And this shows why at our latitudes, at moderate latitudes, say 35 or 40 degrees, down from the equator, say in the northern hemisphere where we are, we might get a jet stream here, the subtropical jet stream, or we might get the polar jet stream right in here. But above that, at these latitudes, there's no wind. So if you want to go high, it's not going to, you're not going to get up there. The wave stops because there's no wind. Here, this thing kind of entrains, and there's already a considerable circulation through the polar vortex, and then this thing here kind of brings along some wind with it, and we have a continuously increasing wind all the way from the ground right up through 100,000 feet. And in those conditions, the wave will go right on up. This was the day we actually flew. We were at like 51,000. We have almost a continuously increasing wind. Looks like a slight saddle, a slight lull right here in the mid-altitude range. But this data is from the global model, and the data might not be completely accurate. That might be a little misleading. Or maybe the slight decrease in wind at the mid-altitudes was not sufficient to kill the wave. In any case, the wave propagated nicely very quickly. Next. This kind of illustrates it. Here's the rise rate, or the vertical velocity of a balloon against altitude. And you can't read this, but this is 100,000 of it. And so a balloon is launched from the ground, it drifts downwind, it gets into the wave here, and then it really amplifies. It takes off and amplifies in the stratosphere. And these are very large amplitude waves. And it's a big wave field. It's going up and down. As it goes downwind, it's going up and down the wave very strongly. And here's the temperature, pretty much a standard stratosphere. Here's a troposphere, tropopause, and it gets just a little bit warmer as you go up in the stratosphere. And here's the wind field. It just gets, the wind gets basically stronger as you go higher. Next slide. Here's one where the wind increases and then it decreases above the tropopause. In this case, the wave gets a high amplitude, and then where the wind starts decreasing, it kills the wave, and so there isn't any more climb. But the temperature profile is pretty similar. Standard troposphere and stratospheric temperature and dew point. Next slide. This is a balloon launched out of South Island, New Zealand. There's a research station there. And this is the measured wave strength. This is taken, removed from this is the buoyancy, the rate of climb in the balloon due to buoyancy. And these oscillations are due to in the wave itself. And you can see as you go up, like here's 50,000 feet, it continues to amplify, just like it showed in some of those things. It amplifies at higher altitude. And here's a typical sailplane that's designed for very high. Here's a sailplane that's designed for very high altitude. It's sink speed, and this is the strength of the wave, so it shows that the sailplane should be able to climb right on up, but not real fast. So here's 10 feet a second and maybe 16 or 18 feet a second here at 25 kilometers. So you got maybe 6 or 8 feet a second net climb rate, you should be able to make good, at least on this particular day. Next one. This is some data NASA got, and once again, it's the DC-8 flying along, and here's a big wave in the troposphere, pretty suppressed in along about the tropopause, and then you can see an amplification taking place as it goes higher. And this doesn't represent the top of the wave, this is just the maximum range of the instrument they were using. Next slide. So, we went to New Zealand for, Steve Fawcett was our sponsor, and let's say we're really grateful to Steve to make this whole thing possible. There was a lot of money involved in getting the whole crew down there and buying the glider and outfitting it and all that. And we went to, and his persistence, we went to New Zealand here 3 seasons and did not really succeed. So we thought, what can we do better? Well, we can go a little bit further south. And the only place in the world further south than New Zealand, before you get to the Antarctic, is in Argentina and Chile. So that's where we thought, let's go and give it a try. So here we are at 50 degrees south in Chile, at a place called El Calafate.
Argentina.
Oh, wow, this is Argentina.
Big mistake. We won't.
So there's our tow plane, kind of a Argentine-built Cub-type airplane, about 200 horse. And there are this gigantic runway. It's 3,000 meters long and 15 wide, and high traffic, 2 DC-9s per day, and a control tower and all the facilities you could ask for. That's our DG 505, and we took out the engine and the prop and put in liquid oxygen and batteries. And this is a drogue chute, about a 11-foot ribbon chute for emergency descent, or conceivably when you fly the waves, especially as you go higher, there's a potential for extreme turbulence, like rotor turbulence on unknown level, because nobody's ever really encountered it. But it could be a lot. And so in case the airplane goes out of control or starts to look like you're going to lose control to the extent that you would overspeed, which is not too hard at really high altitude, well, then we have a drogue chute to hopefully get the nose pointed forward and keep the speed under at a safe speed. Next. So here you are towing up toward the Andes, and here's big lake, Lago Argentino, with icebergs floating in it and big glaciers coming down into it. So the idea, and then our tow pilot very kindly took a picture out the window, and these are the Andes over here. And there's some light spots over in this area, and we tow up under a bunch of clouds and between gaps in the clouds and find our way over to the wave itself. Next. And I'll just mention the flight itself, which was, like I say, we wander around through and between and above and below the clouds to get to the wave. And then when you get to the wave, I don't know how much wave soaring you've done, but it's really worth the price of admission just for the scenery. It is absolutely strikingly, stunningly beautiful. And you might say you feel like a very small boat in a big sea. It's very impressive. I think I borrowed this picture from somebody. I don't think it's our airplane, but it's what we saw all the time. This is from New Zealand, and it is magnificent scenery. Next. Yeah, there's some more of it in New Zealand. On our flight, the other thing I agree with Gordon about, when we're doing these flights, we don't want to fool around. We're not interested in how much we can climb, we're interested in how high we can get. And so for the first year or two, we tow up locally to 5,000 or 6,000 feet in the tertiary wave and get high, and then go forward with the secondary wave. Spend a lot of time and then finally get up to the primary. And it would take literally a couple hours before you ever got in the wave you wanted. And so you were tired and sick of the whole thing by then. So we thought, what the heck, we'll just tow straight to the primary and get underway, get this show on the road. And that's what we did subsequently. And in New Zealand, we even were crazier. We tow up, sometimes there's a thing called Little Bend, and we tow about 1,000 feet high and work up a ridge and work up to the top of the hill and work a bunch of rotors, and finally, after an hour of great cleverness and innovation, we finally find ourselves in the wave, and we finally got over that idea.
But in New Zealand, they find it unsporting, don't they, to tow right into wave?
It probably is unsporting. That's fine with me.
You're supposed to
Oh yeah.
I'm into that.
Yeah, there's air brakes. Without air brakes, if you're up there and you didn't have air brakes, you'd have a hard time getting down. But the only thing you could do is go somehow get on the back side of the lenticulars, either go through them or over them or somehow. Because you can't go fast enough because of your flutter speed. You can't go fast enough to generate very much sink. And it would take a long time to get down without air brakes. So air brakes are essential safety feature. Next. And next, you see that. Okay, this is a big computer generated model of the wave, and this is here's out in the Pacific, here's the Andes, and there's the Atlantic, and this goes from 0 to 20,000 meters, 66,000 feet. And this was generated by the Naval Research Lab at Monterey. That's one of their tasks, is to understand and predict and be able to compute waves. And they're down there diligently doing it, and nobody ever tells them what actually happened. They're just turning out these computer models. So the red is down and the green is up. No, the red is up, I guess the green is down. Yeah, this is flipped, and this is down. So this is a very typical configuration. I've looked at a zillion of these computed things, and the primary frequently tops out here at, say, 35,000 feet, and then that's somewhere around the bottom of the secondary is about the same height. You can go up there, and then I've seen some of them. And here's a tertiary goes up some more, and sometimes the primary will start again at higher altitude. This computation didn't go that high. In any case, these are typical configurations. So, next slide. The green line is our GPS track where we really flew. And so it turns out that the computation was pretty good. We kind of topped out right here. It didn't go quite as high as it said. It topped out here at about 35,000. And in this one, I think we averaged 1,800 feet a minute or 1,600 feet a minute from tow release to 35,000. And then it just topped out, and we went out this way a little bit to see if we were really there. And then we thought, well, maybe it's one of those days with a secondary here. And we came back, and I think this is actually a little bit distorted because of the three-dimensional. But this is all in one plane, projected on one plane. But in any case, very much as predicted. And what I didn't show on here, it looks like when we finally gave up and decided it was time to go home, we're just getting to the good part of the secondary. And on the way home, we started home, Calipetti's over here somewhere. We started home, and I think we're still above 50,000, and we hit this one, and briefly saw 800 feet a minute. And we're sorely tempted to wheel around, but we had already decided that we had proved our point and succeeded, and Fawcett had agreed that it was a good idea to build a pressure cabin, because the pressure suits were really the reason, two reasons we quit climbing. One was, probably three reasons. One was the pressure suits were really cumbersome, increasingly. We knew that was going to be the case when we first got the DG. We thought this is really going to be a problem. But all we'll have to do is somehow point the airplane into wind and fly at the correct speed and just go up like that. No. The speed wasn't that high. There were a lot of figure eights in the thing. So it meant just a lot of maneuvering continuously. And as the suit gets harder and harder, they were built for the U-2 and the SR-71, where there's a big cockpit, plenty of room. In the glider, you're right here, the legs balloon out, and you've got the stick between your legs, and you're trying to compress the suit as you use the aileron. And then, but the real problem was I couldn't reach up to the canopy rail to adjust the little display, soaring display, GPS, because you don't realize that you're adjusting that all the time. The sun angle is never right, and you got to have the sun just right so you can read that thing. And so I just never could read it. It was never in the right place because we were always turning and maneuvering. And so, but fortunately, Fawcett could read his in the back, and the back cockpit was a little bit better configured, and he could adjust it. And so I'd see the rate of climb go up, and I'd say, mark it! And then I'd go out and lose the lift and do kind of a whippered hill and turn around and make a wild guess on where the lift was and come back. And pretty soon I'd say, which way? And he's got the mark there, and he says, 90 left or something like that. And I'd turn 90 left. So we just blundered around back and forth for about an hour above 50,000 feet trying to get higher. And we got a little, not above 50, above 45,000, about an hour above 45,000. And we'd get little bites. Every time we hit it good, we'd go up a couple hundred feet and then lose it, and come back and go up a couple hundred more. And finally, when we got to what we figured was about 51,500, we said, this seems to be doing pretty much what we think it was going to do. And it's getting, looks like it's probably getting stronger. And we're really getting cold. And it's going to take a long time to get very much higher, so let's go home. And so it was a pretty good decision. So we did not turn around and try to climb higher. It might have worked. And sometimes I think, I wish we turned around. But then I think again, we landed, and it was about 2 hours before I stopped shivering, and lots of hot cocoa and warm clothes and hot showers and stuff. It was really, really cold all the way. And that too was kind of a blunder, because it seems like every time with a pressure suit you get in the cockpit and you feel a little bit different. And this particular day, for some reason, I was sitting a little bit higher. I couldn't get low. And my head was right against the canopy. And as the suit inflates, it pushes up. And you got this thing you pull down as the suit inflates, and you pull down hard. So I thought, I really don't want to push the canopy off the airplane. And so I pulled the cushion out from under me. So I sat on the bare seat. And the bare seat is kind of epoxied right into the skin of the airplane. So it really got cold. My butt was just absolutely a chunk of ice. And you don't realize it until it's happening, but you're really getting a state of hypothermia.
Hey, Einar, do you have any padding on your underwear?
No, do not.
That really helps with the pushing up. I discovered it really fast.
Okay, that's great.
Just about, 2.5 inches of padding on.
Well, I didn't have anything like enough room for 2.5, but a quarter of an inch of good insulation would have been very welcome at that point. But okay, so much for that. Okay, I think I'll skip pretty close.
I'm sorry.
Let's go back. This shows pretty much. This is very close to adiabatic lapse rate all the way from wherever we started to. And it doesn't show the inversion that they always say is a good thing sometime around mountaintop like this. It doesn't show any inversion. And then up here above the tropopause, where the thing that's interesting is it shows a big bunch of scatter. This was measured temperatures from some precision thermometers we had up here. And what I interpret this to mean is that all of that flying, or the great majority of that flying, was done in the more or less the lift part of the wave, which is not that wide an area. It might be a couple of miles at most, quarter wavelength, say. Our waves were all right in Argentina, almost all of them were around 9 nautical mile wavelength. So this would be maybe a quarter mile. And so we've got a 10 degrees centigrade variation in temperature in a quarter mile horizontally. And that's a lot of temperature variation, which has a lot of, I'll cover that a little bit later. Next one. So we did, Greg Cole was engaged, and he designed this airplane, and we're well along with the building of it. And it's a pressure cabin, and we have a pretty good view out of it. And we want to get it built. And it looks pretty promising. We ran out of money when it was about 3/4 completed. And it looks like we have high hopes that we'll get some more money here fairly soon and finish this everything up. Next. This was a complete fuselage. It was originally intended to be a flight fuselage, and we got to thinking that our plan is to fly pressure cabin, no pressure suits, so it's what we call a no-fail cabin. And if the cabin fails above about 65 or 70,000 feet, it's not good for one at all.
Bad for your health.
We tested it to 25 psi, and the working pressure is 8 psi, so we have a good safety factor. And there's a lot of safety features built into it, and we think it really is a no-fail cabin. But as time goes by, we may or may not stick with that philosophy. We may chicken out and put on some sort of a backup system. That's a whole flight fuselage, and we tested it at 25 psi with under 6G flight loads. Next. This is just some interesting things about flying at high altitude. Sea level, 20,000 feet. This is Reynolds number, and the red is Reynolds number. So the Reynolds, this is a constant, basically constant indicated airspeed of around maybe 50-ish for that airplane. So the Reynolds number really drops a lot. So you're flying with kind of like a big model airplane as far as Reynolds number.
Anybody else need to know what a Reynolds number is?
Yeah, what's Reynolds?
I'd like to know.
Yeah,
Okay.
Tell them.
Would you tell me?
Airplanes don't work as well at low Reynolds numbers, so the flow tends to separate. It doesn't go around corners as well. You normally don't get as much lift, and you get more drag at low Reynolds numbers.
Is it a function of the airport?
Well, every airfoil behaves differently as you change Reynolds number. You can make them work. They can be more sensitive or less sensitive to Reynolds number, but they're always sensitive. There's nothing you can do. You're going to lose performance at low Reynolds number. You lose quite a bit of performance at low Reynolds number.
You can think of at low Reynolds numbers, you can think it's the viscosity forces that really start to take over. So as you go to a lower Reynolds number, the viscous forces, causes a thicker boundary layer. That's what causes the extra drag, causes the separation layer. So
Yeah, the viscosity kind of counterintuitive. If you think about separation, I think it's sticky, it's going to stick to the surface. But it doesn't. It separates, and you typically don't get as much lift. A lot of things are a little different as you change Reynolds number.
So it's a sum of a bunch of different things like density and temperature and
Viscosity and density will be over the size. Yeah, bigger, the better. The 747, if you made a quarter size 747, it would not be a good shape. It would not be an efficient airplane.
so that's a function of a lot of different interactions.
Yeah.
What constitutes a low number? You said 200,000 to be that.
Oh, well, it doesn't mean a thing. It's strictly, that's arbitrary, but for sailplanes, they normally, this rho VL over mu is based on the average chord of the wing. L is the average chord of the wing. And mu is viscosity and rho is density. And so for people that design sailplanes and ponder sailplanes, typically they're working up here in this area, 1,400,000 down to maybe in low speed flight, 600,000 or 700,000. So this is where sailplanes typically work. And then here is kind of terra incognita. Not totally, because model airplanes do, and there's been a lot of theory and practice down in this region. And then this is Mach number. We start out with very low Mach number, like 0.09, and then at the higher altitudes, like here, we're up at 0.5 Reynolds number. And 0.5 Reynolds number is very significant. It's half a Mach. Doesn't sound like much, but on top of the wing where you got high lift, well, the flow reaches Mach 1. and you'll get a shock wave. So that's why we're at 90,000 instead of 100,000. Originally, we wanted to go to 100,000, but in the course of the design, we thought, if we go much above 90, we're going to be working with a shock wave, which is there's nothing magic about a shock wave, except it's likely to cause separation and high drag, and it can cause some buffing.
So you did the computer modeling that showed you that at
Oh, yeah.
100,000 you would have a shock
Lots
wave?
of computer modeling. Yeah. So we're running into the two problems that are not, and in combination, it makes making an efficient airplane a little bit different kind of a problem. The low Reynolds number and a high Mach number. So this airplane is a little different than anybody else. This kind of shows some of the peculiarities of the flight dynamics. This is Dutch roll damping. And when you fly along in turbulence, say, I don't know if you're flying a Cessna or something, and it goes like that from side to side, that's Dutch roll. It's not much roll, but you call it Dutch roll anyway. And the sailplanes, you never really notice it. Because say at 10,000 feet, you fly along here and something upsets you, and this is side slip here. And it make one beat and it's right completely damped out. And so you don't have to do anything. You just leave your feet on the floor and it'll straighten itself out. You go to 60,000 feet and it'll sit there and for quite a long time, it'll take a long time to damp out. And we could feel that at 51,000 in the DG. When Steve wanted to fly a little bit at that altitude, and he wasn't too skillful on the rudders, and had a little bit of residual side slip, and it just kept doing that, which is not a bad thing. But as you go higher, eventually you get to the point where it actually amplifies, and so you got to do something about it. So this airplane almost certainly will have to have a yaw damper. It's not a big deal either. It's just one of the things you have to do.
It's an active system.
Yeah, electrically actuated rudder.
Because you can do it better than the pilot can.
One thing your pilot cannot do is damp Dutch roll. I've tried it many times. At least I've never had much success, personally. I don't know about you.
That's difficult.
You always-
It's interaction of yaw and roll.
And you can never get.
You hardly ever make it better.
Yeah.
What sort of frequencies are we talking? It's like a few
Oh.
seconds.
Well, 5 seconds, something like that.
You know, period of 5 seconds, 1.5 radians a second or something.
Next one? Oh, yeah. Well, this shows that different airfoils. This is the airfoil on the DG 505, and this is Reynolds number, high Reynolds number, low Reynolds number. You see the DG, the performance really drops to higher altitudes. That's 90,000 feet. And Greg designs special airfoils, and they're not as good as the DG airfoil at lower, higher Reynolds numbers, but somewhere up here around 60,000, 50 or 60,000 feet, they start getting better, and they perform much better once you get up to very high altitude. And that's what you have to do, is you give away some performance at low altitude. Reap the benefit at high altitude. Next one. This just shows the airplane. This is a low-speed airplane, low wing loading, about 7 pounds per square foot, and high lift wing. So at sea level, it'll sink about 100 feet a minute, about 40 knots. And at 90,000 feet, it'll sink about 850 feet a minute at 270 knots. Which should be okay. We're sinking 14 feet a second. So we still got the, typically, hopefully 6 or 8 feet a second climb at high altitude. But it's not a lot. You can't afford to waste it. Next. Oh, this little thing, here the U-2 you have to, there's only 3 knots between stall and Mach limit at altitude. But that sounds worse than it is. This is a little interesting thing. This is how much you have to nose over and how much altitude you have to lose to pick up 1 knot of indicated airspeed. So here at sea level, it looks like 5 feet. If if you lose 5 feet, you pick up 1 knot of indicated airspeed. 70,000 feet, where U-25s are 75,000 feet, you've got to dive almost 70 feet to pick up 1 knot of airspeed. So it means that you've got a lot more room to play with. So with 3 knots, you got 200 and almost 300 feet of altitude to play with before you pick up the speed. At 90,000 feet, you've got 150 feet you've got to dive to pick up a knot. So it has 2 implications. One is it's easy to hold airspeed, but second is you can't use airspeed very much to stabilize your flight path because it doesn't respond much to a change in flight path.
Clear jet 60 Bravo 9, taxi 1134.
May I ask a question?
Yeah.
When you're climbing from the primary wave to the second wave a little farther back,
Yeah.
and given that you have so little airspeed control and no thrust to overcome the wind shear that you're going to get with the wind speed change, and particularly a dramatic one where you go from 100 to 200 knots, how do you counteract that? How do you keep from just losing control of the aircraft at that high altitude with any shear, which is going to be inevitable?
Well, the shear is distributed over that whole altitude band. It's not a sharp edge shear. Actually, honestly, you're not even aware there's a wind shear.
Okay.
And controlling the airspeed, like I say, is very easy. Flying that airplane is really quite easy at high altitude. It's not a demanding task. But it does bring up potential. Say if you can have a 10-knot airspeed band, this airplane is better than you do. It looks like even at 90,000, you probably have a 10-knot indicated airspeed operating band. And that means you've got like 1,500 feet of potential altitude you can change with 10 knots. And with 1,500 feet, you've got to start thinking about dynamic soaring. There's a chance of dynamic soaring. It brings, yeah, go back. And that's our drogue chute, that's the notional airplane. But one thing that sort of comes out in this thought about airspeed's not very sensitive to pitch angle. If you start thinking about total energy, because if you're not holding pitch real steady, you're going to have altitude changes, you're going to have airspeed changes, and they're going to correspond to large energy changes. And so it'd be easy to fly inefficiently and not be aware of it.
So rather than go by the airspeed indicator, are you going by just pitch attitude? Or?
Well, I don't know exactly how you'll fly. I think in the first place, I think we need a very high resolution, say 10th of a knot, expanded scale airspeed at the real high altitudes. So you can see the 10ths of a knot going by. And if you see it moving at all, that means that you're not flying level. That's one thing. And if your total energy measurement is not accurate, because when you're out here, we're not too picky about total energy. As long as it doesn't do crazy when you do zoomies, well, you're satisfied. It looks halfway reasonable. But for us, it can be critical because if we give away 200 or 300 feet a minute, we're just not going to climb very well. So we need a very precise total energy measurement. And since we're going at that very high speed, 270 knots, you don't have to change airspeed very much to get a big change in total energy. So that's a technical problem, is figuring out how to measure total energy very accurately. There's an interesting little thing about total energy, like if you use a Braunschweig tube, what do they call them nowadays, an X tube, or anyway, whatever you use to get your total energy, you're a little icky on your radio tube. It only works because it happens to be, I think it's sort of a coincidence, that your total pressure, not your total pressure, your impact pressure is proportional to V squared. And energy is also proportional to V squared. So it makes one a nice substitute for the other, a proxy for the other. Except, as the Mach number goes up, impact pressure is not proportional to V squared. It's proportional to V squared plus some other terms because of the Mach compressibility. And so you build up at the higher Mach numbers, there's an intrinsic error in total energy measurement with a probe system. So what are you going to do? Maybe you measure true airspeed, which means you've got to measure true airspeed extremely accurately in order for it not to be misleading in terms of total energy when you're already flying that fast. Because there's a lot of energy in play when you're doing kinetic energy in play when you're doing 170 true. So it's another little bunch of technical problems. So much for Perlan. I was going to talk about wave soaring, some safety issues. I guess I started flying high altitude airplanes in around 1954, like single seat airplanes where you wear an oxygen mask. And from then till now, my feeling is that hypoxia is probably the single biggest risk in flying those airplanes. Hypoxia. I've had 2 friends die in hypoxia accidents. I've had hypoxia twice myself, once very dangerous, once less dangerous. And I can tell you that when you go into the altitude chamber and they say, take off your mask and learn what your symptoms are, that's very interesting. But that's not how it really happens. Because you're usually engrossed in some task and you suddenly think, why is this really difficult to do? You know, is this really this hard a task? And you think about it a while and pretty soon you think, oh, hypoxia. And about that time you're just about ready to, you're lucky if you've got enough intelligence left to actually take some action to cure the hypoxia thing. And the cure for hypoxia is having a system that really works well, and you make sure you're using it right. Yeah, it's just when you're flying, particularly when you're flying by yourself. Do you have a secondary system? If you're flying over, I don't know, certainly if you're getting up toward 25,000, you better have a backup oxygen system. And do you have any warning system that you're not getting, that the oxygen is not reaching you? Is there any system in there, in your airplane that warns you that the oxygen is not reaching you? You probably should. Do you wear a, I don't know, does anybody wear an oximeter?
We carry one.
I'm not sure if that's a good solution or not. The military's toyed with the idea for many, many years, and they've never adopted it for whatever reason.
What is that, sorry?
Oh, a little thing to clamp on your finger or your ear or someplace, and it continuously reads out your blood oxygen saturation.
You know, another solution that is kind of similar is to wear, if you have a Garmin watch,
A what?
a Garmin watch, you know, connected to a strap for your, you know, if your heart rate goes way up, probably things are not what they're supposed to be. And your watch will beep at you. You can set it up, it starts going crazy. You look at it, you went from 80 to 120. That's probably a good
Yeah, I
sign.
don't know what your heart does when you get hypoxia.
I've actually tested that.
Oh, okay, what's it do?
Because I went up, with another pilot, they were PIC, and got up to 26,000 feet and took off my mask for a while, watched the pulse oximeter, and, you know, my oxygen level went down over about 60 seconds, 2 minutes, but my heart rate immediately went up to about 120.
Oh, really? Oh,
And
that's
just,
good
I
to know.
mean, like that.
Wow,
I
okay.
did the same thing at that
So, yeah.
hyper chambering with NASA. That's the first thing it goes, is your heart trying to keep up.
Yeah, so that would be a good way to, heart rate.
Yeah, because
monitor, I
that
guess.
thing in your finger, if you're flying along, you know, you have you got layers on you, it's cold, so.
Yeah, that's the only problem. You have to have it on a
Yeah.
bare finger.
You can
so
put it on your.
I have one really cold finger. So,
And also, if anyone here is on beta blockers, don't use that technique.
yeah. Oh, for the heart rate.
The heart rate
yeah,
won't go
yeah,
up.
that won't work. Yeah.
Well, I just toss those ideas out there to let you know that it's really serious. Oh yeah, bends. If you fly a long time above 25,000, like several hours, or if you fly very much above, say, 35,000, there's a fair probability of getting bends if you don't pre-breathe. It's high enough that you'll probably eventually get it. There are a lot of glider pilots have experienced bends. One pilot that used to fly here was Sabrina. I think she died recently. But she did a lot of high altitude flying up 37, 38,000 feet, and she got the bends a lot. And I didn't know her, but people who knew her said she was never quite right after that. And the bends caused mini strokes in her brain. And bends in itself, pain in your joint and tingling and different things like that, is not particularly serious. When I first was in the Air Force, in the fighter squadron, we also had an old T-33, which we used for target. And we'd go up to 45,000 and fly along for a couple of hours. And that airplane always had on the bottom of the list for maintenance, because the commander got graded on how many fighters were ready to go. And so he always wanted to put good mechanics on the fighters. And the T-33, you could fix it when you really had to. So the cabin pressurization at 45,000, you were usually about 43,000. And you'd sit there for an hour with the bends, and we thought we were tough guys, and it was a two-seater, and how's your bends? Oh yeah, I can handle it. And so we did that for a couple of years. And then one day, a guy in the neighbor squadron, just next door, he came down, and just as he was landing, his vision went completely red. That's all he could see was red. And we suddenly got way more particular, and we started complaining about pressurization a lot. And I had been under the impression that you could start feeling some tingles or some pains in your joints with the bends, and so that's a good warning that you can come down probably before something serious happens. But I learned a few years ago that that's not necessarily the first symptom. The first symptom you get for the bends could be, your brain could stop working, and on occasion it has happened. I'll tell you a story. Do you know the story about Buddy Foot?
I know Buddy Foot, but
Do you?
yes.
Well, I'll tell you the story of Buddy Foot. Back in somewhere around 75, Buddy Foot was a young, gung-ho Marine and an enthusiastic glider pilot. And he had a 604, big, really high-performance super ship. And he wanted to fly high altitude. And so, and he was pretty good at it. And he flew up and he was flying the 604 and he got to like 42,000. And he was flying along, and that was fine. And he did what he wanted to do. And he came down and landed. And he was driving home back to the Marine base in Del Toro. And he got the bends in the car, delayed bends. And being a good gung-ho Marine, he said, oh, I got the bends. And he drove right into sick bay and turned himself in and says, I got the bends. And they said, oh yeah, we'll take care of that. And I don't know what they did, is breathe pure oxygen until it goes away, typically. And they said, by the way, we're going to mark this on your record. And he had been accepted for pilot training as a Marine. He was going to be a Marine pilot. And so this got up to the pilot training people and they said, oh, damaged goods, you're out of here. So he had to stay in the Marines, he was enlisted. And he became a simulator engineer on the A4. And so one night, he was pretty good at flying the A4 in the simulator. He was a pretty good glider pilot. And he went out and started up an A4 in the middle of the night and took off. And he flew all around Southern California for 2 hours. Went down into Mexico and screwed around and went out and buzzed his house and just had a good time. And they eventually realized what had happened, and he said, okay, I'm ready to come into land. And so some idiot said, well, turn off the landing lights, we don't want them landing here. I mean, the runway lights. And he pulled up and went around, and finally somebody said, wait a minute, he's got to land somewhere. And so they landed fine and taxied in, and everybody was happy. And then they just carted him off to the brig. But he eventually got out, and so he engaged in various nefarious activities since then. Any questions on the Perlan or whatever? Yeah.
Who first discovered that polar vortex? How did they discover that?
I don't know. Well, the polar vortex in general, which is just a big
The high altitude
west
stuff.
to east. Well, the high altitude, that's another matter. I think it was around 1980-ish, and that was in connection with research on the ozone hole. They suddenly started doing a lot of research in the polar stratosphere, and I think that's when it became apparent.
With aircraft or balloons, or what were they?
Yes.
Both?
Well, yeah, I don't know what they did. And it probably started showing up in the global model, I would guess, because it comes right out in the global model. So I don't know who did it or exactly when, but it was right around 1980.
What is the main objective of the Perlan Project? Is it to set an altitude record?
To say, gee whiz, look at that. And it's also, well, that's not entirely true. It turns out that, I didn't go into this, but overturning waves, breaking waves, as these waves, as you see, they increase with amplitude increases with altitude. And it turns out that there's a theory that says that the amplitude increases exactly the same way that true airspeed increases with respect to indicated airspeed with altitude. Inversely, it's the square root of the density. So they get taller and taller and taller and taller, and at some altitude they are very likely, almost certain, to reach a point of instability, and they call them breaking waves. They crash. And you can sometimes see this in the sounding. There will be a big 10,000-foot band of adiabatic lapse rate up there in the stratosphere where it's supposed to be isothermal. And with the big mixing, it becomes adiabatic. And so there's typically like a 10,000-foot or 2 or 3 kilometer thick bunch of turbulence up there, and nobody has really characterized it. We just know it's there. And it's usually, typically it's high, probably higher than we can get, but not always. It might be down at altitudes where we can fly. And it turns out that it's important, because in the stratosphere, the air doesn't mix. It just slides past each other. It's so smooth. You get molecular diffusion, and that's about it. And so stuff that's in the stratosphere, just like particles, they just slowly settle. And there's no mixing of the actual gases. They don't mix at all. And energy, momentum, and mass do not mix, except over year-long periods. But with breaking waves, it mixes a lot immediately. And it turns out in the global model, in order to get the equations to balance, they sort of arbitrarily stick in some mixing here and there. They really know there's probably breaking waves somewhere because the equations aren't balancing what we're doing. So they stick that in there, and it's not real predictable. And I was reading a big summary of climate research, and they list a bunch of things they wish they understood better. And one is breaking waves, because this will probably have some effect on long-term weather, the mixing of the polar and the other parts of the atmosphere. And so they'd like to be able to predict it better, and they'd like to know better when and how and where it happens. So there's some value, that has that value. And then we are able, I think people have a pretty good idea of how ozone, the whole ozone cycle, catalytic destruction of ozone. But if they don't, we can park right exactly where principal ozone destruction occurs, because it occurs right in the upside of a mountain wave. That's where really powerful ozone destruction occurs, in the condensation of the droplets right there in those nacreous clouds. And so if anybody wants us to, we could sit there and park there, and they could, at their leisure, look at whatever process is taking place. But nobody has asked us to do that. I've had people say, I've been to NOAA and say, would you like to back us? I say, no, but if you show you can do it, we might give you some operating funds.
So where do you get your funding from?
A couple of, Dennis Tito was our big money. And then there was a big Australian who gave us, it seemed like a big money at the time to us, but it was kind of paled in comparison to what Dennis Tito put up. And we need some more. We're looking for some more. I think we may have a backer, which I can't mention at the moment, but I have high hopes. Yeah.
One of the things, just for perspective, is 100,000 feet is 20 miles.
Yeah.
About the distance from here to Carson City, just to give you a measure. It's not very far.
No, it isn't. Well, it seems like a long way when you're up there.
Yes.
Let me tell you, when we came back from El Calafate, we got back to, we'd been up over the Andes, and we took our time and just floated back, and we got to the airfield, El Calafate, still above 50,000 feet, and banked up and looked down, and we thought, boy, that is really a long way down. This little tiny airfield down there. I've seen it from a lot higher a lot of times in power planes, but sitting there in a glider just peacefully, no noise. And we had this wonderful system where we had no canopy fog whatsoever. And so it was just absolutely clear. It was like cheating. And the view and just looking down there was so striking to feel how high we were. I'm sure from 100,000 feet, it would really look high.
I think one of the things that puts it in perspective is, what is the density at 90,000 feet compared to sea level?
Yeah, it's 2%, or 1.7%.
So, 90, that's it. You're on the edge of space. I mean, and to still be able to use that tiny bit of density to stay up is just amazing.
Yeah, you got the square root of something like 0.017. Anyway, it turns out you got to go about 8 times as fast to get lift.
The waves that are propagating up there, are they coming off of mountain ranges?
Yes.
They are.
Yes.
So even though they're downrange 700 miles, they're still being formed. It's not a.
They appear to be big wave fields.
But what's causing the start off is mountain ranges down close to the mountain.
Yeah. Now, interestingly, that NASA wave thing I showed you, it only showed two harmonics. But I have a lot of other data, of LiDAR data, that showed, mostly in the northern hemisphere, up at over the Scandinavian high mountains of northern Scandinavia. But there's another big field of waves over Finland. And it looked like maybe this thing blossomed and then it kind of subsided, but it had some seed in it, and it got back 200 or 300 miles downwind and it blossomed again into another wave field. That's sort of a wild thought I have. They might do that. Because once, you don't need a real big disturbance at the tropopause or to amplify into a big wave at high altitude. Thank you.
Thank you.